Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by HarperCollins Australia. Fleur McDonald is the author of 24 novels, clocking up more than 850,000 book sales across a career that has spanned more than 16 years. She is a best-selling rural crime author and has built a loyal fan base of readers with her incredible cast of characters and settings. The most popular and recognisable, of course, is Detective Dave Burrows. But in a move that is set to cement Fleur's reputation as a master of crime writing, Fleur has released a brand new novel called The Prospect. Published by HarperCollins Australia, The Prospect brings two of Fleur's other characters, Jack Higgins and Zara Ellison, to the fore in this gripping high-stakes thriller exploring the Australian gold mining industry, outlaw motorcycle gangs, and most interestingly, the ever-increasing phenomenon of grey nomads who are hitting the roads across this vast country of ours. A fantastic story which had me hooked from its opening pages, always a great sign, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to chat with Fleur once again today. Welcome back to the podcast, Fleur.
Oh, thank you for having me again.
It's my pleasure. And congratulations on this new novel, that it does mark a bit of a change in direction for you as a writer, in that it really does ramp up the crime aspects of your writing. And you've also changed publisher. So I wanted to ask you, did that impact your decision to venture into crimier crime, if I can say that?
I love that term. It's so technical, isn't it? Crimier crime. And that was what I wanted to do. I had a goal that I wanted to try and write, deeper crime novels, because that is what I love to read. And I also wanted to be taken seriously as a writer. And sometimes that's a little bit difficult when, you've got those lovely looking flawless girls on your front covers. People have a preconceived ideas about what is inside that cover. And the amount of times that I got told your covers aren't doing your stories any favors, I sort of really felt that I could get more readers if we changed covers, rejacketed, put a bit more grittiness into the stories. And that's what I really wanted to do. So unfortunately, the only way I could do that was to change publishers. I have always prided myself as a very loyal person, and until all avenues are exhausted, and that's where we got to. So I've been very, very happy to go across to HarperCollins Australia and sit under Anna Valdinger, and yeah, it's been great. I guess when you've had a character around also as long as what Detective Dave Burrows had been around, that can almost make you a little bit lazy as a writer, because you know the character so well and you can bash out the books very quickly. And I was worried I was going to bore my readers as well. So, that was another thought process about making sure that I was still producing really good, readable, tense, page-turnable books. That was the whole decision behind.
It says a lot about you as a writer and as a person that you kind of wanted to step it up, and that you were wanting to not only, challenge your readers in the sense that, make it a meatier kind of book, but challenge yourself as a writer.
I'm up for challenges all the time. I don't want to be one of those old 70-year-olds sitting around in a wheelchair, not able to get up and do things. My brain needs to be active and elastic. I need to be able to move. I'm learning to fly because I want to keep my brain really active. And that goes with writing as well. Let's always step the challenges up and make everything a little bit better than the time before, and hopefully we'll see some benefit of that in time. And it's funny, I just really wanted my stories to reach more people. That was what I was really keen for.
I feel certain that this is going to be the case with this book. It is truly a wonderful, wonderful story. Now, for those die-hard Fleur McDonald fans out there who are listening to this podcast today, The Prospect is not a Detective Dave Burrows book, and I think Dave is only mentioned in passing in this one. And as I mentioned to you, Fleur, before we started recording, the last Dave Burrows book I read was Deception Creek. So are you moving away from Dave?
Yeah, apologies to everybody that's reading that didn't know, but I made a fairly big announcement back in October that I was retiring Detective Dave. Again, for all of those reasons that I've just said before, that was probably my biggest risk, was losing readers because they were upset that I had retired, Dave. But again, I just didn't want to lose anybody because those stories were getting. I was always worried we were telling the same story in a different way, and I didn't want to do that. So I've been really lucky. Most people that have come back to me have totally accepted that Dave had to retire, and they've sort of embraced Jack and Zara. I don't know whether Jack and Zara will be around for many books either. In the prospect, it is the first book of a series, but to me, it's the town Kalgoorlie that links all the stories together. So I don't know that I want to get locked into writing another main character like Dave for 20, I think it was 22 books out of the 25 that I've written. I think it was 22 that he's in. So yeah, I'm not sure that I want to get locked into that again. Even the masters of crime, like the greats like Michael Connolly, has just introduced a new character, like a new detective. It's a standalone novel from what I understand. I haven't read it yet. I'm waiting for it to turn up in the post. But, Michael Connolly's been a huge, I've just always loved his work, and he's gone off and done this at the same time as what I have, which is interesting after Harry has been around for a long time. He's obviously been around a bit longer than what Dave has, but about the same type of books, the same number of books.
I think it's a good move because you do attract different readers. And I think with Jack and Zara, there's a great potential to be attracting younger readers.
Oh, I hope so. Who doesn't want to write the next book that everybody that's young inhales? I would love to be part of a movement that got young people back into reading again. So we can only hope.
As mentioned earlier, this story was as intriguing as it was entertaining. It's set in Kalgoorlie, as you mentioned. Kalgoorlie is the biggest gold mining town in Australia. In fact, it's the site of Australia's biggest open cut mine. It's called the Fimiston Pit, open pit. I think that's how you say it. Now, what was the impetus and inspiration for the story, and why did you set it there?
Well, I didn't really have a whole heap of ideas for the story. The setting came very quickly because when we signed with HarperCollins and we knew that I wanted to write crime, I was thinking about a setting. And, all of our Australian great crime writers like Jane Harper and Chris Hammer set their books sort of on the East Coast. And, we've got Margaret Hickey, who's now setting them sort of down the bottom of Australia. And Michael Trant sets his to the sort of north on WA coast. And I thought, I need to be different. What's my point of difference? And my point of difference is red dirt, Kalgoorlie, gold mining. There is no more corrupt industry than mining, unless perhaps you're in politics. So I felt that was a really good point of difference for me. There's not a whole heap of books that are written around Kalgoorlie. So that was my point of difference. And then when I went up there, Kalgoorlie is only 4 hours north of where I live, and I'd spent a bit of time up there anyway. But when I went back up to start researching this book, all I saw was, because I went in wildflower season, all I saw was caravans, grey nomads. And I thought, there are so many of you that you sort of just blend into the atmosphere, I suppose. And I thought the best way that criminals hide is in plain sight. So caravanners, and then of course you've got gold and you've got secrets, and still that real Wild West feel of a town that is almost a little bit lawless. They still peg mining leases at midnight, not during the day. They're pegged at midnight. So you can go to peg a mining lease and 4 or 5 people might actually turn up to do that. And then, of course, there's an argument, fisticuffs, or there could be guns, and there still is guns. So it just seemed to me this massive, rich tapestry of a place to set the stories. Also, you've got the truckies that come east-west. They don't go quite into Cal, but they go very close. And having come from a background in transport when I was growing up, I know that those buggers can be a little bit naughty at times. So there's that opportunity to use a truckie as a character. To the north, there's a lot of Crown land, a lot of communities, and still some mines. So, that's a good spot to set something that you need in isolation. And then to the west, you sort of got more farming land, and to the south, you've got more mines and farming land again. So to spread out over that whole area just, to me, gives a huge area to set loads of stories and lots of scope. Of course, that makes it a little bit difficult when you come to describe the country all the time. And I know that I'm known for my descriptive writings because I love using the setting as a character. And when you're writing the same thing over and over again, you've got to find new ways to put that in there that's a little bit different. So, but, all of that is challenging, and that was what I was looking for. As well as, knowing that Kalgoorlie was where I wanted to set it. I suppose I did start with the idea that Jack and Zara were coming across. And there was a really important reason for that. And that was to make sure that my rusted on readers didn't feel like they were being just turfed out into this ocean of not understanding what was coming. I wanted them to open the book and feel like they had gone back into a Fleur McDonald book, but with a couple of characters that they knew, and that was a whole heap more gritty than what they'd read before.
Okay, so for those of us who haven't yet read this story, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
It's a police procedural that is obviously based in Kalgoorlie. It starts off with Jack and Zara have moved across from South Australia. Zara has had quite a bad misdemeanor that has seen her banished to the back blocks. So they're each struggling with the way that they have fitted into Kalgoorlie to the move itself. Neither of them were that thrilled about the move. And then, of course, there is an accident that's involving some grey nomads, and they're both running a parallel investigation that will collide at some stage, but you'll have to read the book to find out how.
It opens wonderfully, and as I said, I was hooked from its opening pages. So you spent some time in Kalgoorlie researching the story. What was the most surprising thing you uncovered about this town?
So I think I spent about 2 months all in all over the 6 months that I was writing it. Surprising, look, the stories that came out of the brothels. There's only one brothel left in Kalgoorlie now. The rich history, like I said before, it's just a lawless town. And early on, there were many, many brothels, and they were all in the same area. So when I say early, like probably 1900s upwards, till about 80s when they deregulated the sex industry and made the brothels die. But, the madam that runs the brothel over there, her name is Carmel, and she's in her 90s. Her husband died when she was about 50, and she fell into quite a deep depression, and her doctor said, just go and do something different. So she did. She went and bought a brothel in Kalgoorlie, as you do. There is that part of Cal. There's a bikie chapter up there that I have interestingly had some contact with the bikies unwillingly on my behalf. They didn't like some of the things I wrote on Facebook, so they made their presence known to me more recently. Then, of course, there's the Two Up, which isn't mentioned in this book, but is mentioned a lot in the next book. And Two Up is, that a gambling game that is actually illegal everywhere else in Australia, unless it's played on Anzac Day or you've got a license. Well, these guys play every Sunday, and the amount of cash is just insane. There are millions of dollars in cash around the Two Up ring on a Sunday afternoon, especially in race round. So, they're surprising things. If the government ever decided to get rid of cash, Kalgoorlie would stop. Gold is bought for cash. And the prospecting, I don't know if anyone that's listening has been prospecting before, but if you can imagine like a detector that everyone's probably seen a detector, I suppose, but it's swung from side to side. And detecting has its own language. So you call that, they're off out for a swing because they're swinging from side to side. And I had a go at it. And it's the most boring thing I've ever done because it reminds me of vacuuming, You just go from side to side like you're vacuuming your house. It's like, well, I could stay home and do this. And of course, I haven't found any gold, so I haven't had that rush. But, unless you go there, you just don't see, you don't feel, you don't absorb. And seeing, feeling, and absorbing for me, paramount to write a book, because the more realistic you make it, I think, the more page turning it is, because people can see those things happening.
I did have a little bit of a giggle about that term, going out for a swing, because I think it means something very different over here in the eastern states.
Yes, well, we had a bit of a laugh about that in the edits. And of course, I'm deep in my story thinking exactly about prospecting. And as soon as the editor said swingers, I just went, oh, yeah, maybe we should just sort of put something around that. So that was what we did.
And very cleverly done as well. I loved it. Fleur, I'm not telling you how to suck eggs here, but Australia has a complex relationship with mining. I think in general, most Australians understand the benefits to our future prosperity provided by the mining industry, but its impact on the environment and contribution to climate change make it a topic of contention for young Australians, I think in particular. And in the novel, some of your characters have some quite interesting views about the impact of mining, big mining corporations, and the impact that they have on Australia and the way of life. And in particular, Janelle Salter, the character who's heading up the No Mines Party, which almost seems like a bit of a death wish in a town like Kalgoorlie. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and what informed the character of Janelle?
I don't know. She just sort of turned up fully formed, isn't it? It's silly how writers say that. I knew that I wanted to bring a politics type of link into this book, and Janelle was that. I guess books are about conflict, aren't they? And resolving that conflict at the end. And Janelle turning up in a mining town with a party called No Mines is about as conflicting as what you can get, as conflicting as what Jack, a detective, and Zara, a journalist, is in, being partners. So the conflict that I wanted to bring in there and the reasoning behind that conflict sort of, I hope, pushes that story along. But interestingly, when I first started writing this book, there was a political party that had started in WA that was something very, very similar, but, it turned up and then it disappeared. We'd just never heard of it again, which I think would have been very easy for something like a No Minds party to have happen to them.
And so tell me more about how you got across the different points of view in the novel. Like, was this something that you intuitively understand being somebody on the land, or were you out there talking to people and sort of gaining their different points of view?
Yeah, I did do a heap of research. As I said, I spent a fair bit of time in Kalgoorlie, and I talked to so I got very involved with the Gold Squad, like the detectives with the Gold Squad. They've been really helpful, Andy and Ryan. They give me a whole heap of information. As for the grey nomads, I did a camping trip with a camper up north in WA a couple of years ago, through COVID actually. And what you see in any caravan park or any camping area is universal across Australia. The wife trying to get the husband to pack the caravan into the right spot is the biggest reason for divorce, I think. Yeah. And again, just spending time in Kalgoorlie and looking and listening. There was one particular time that I was walking down the main street and I came across 3 people out the front of a particular shop, and I was in the market for what that shop sold at the time. And these 3 women were vaping out the front, and I walked in and there was no one around, but I didn't think very much of it. So I heard from outside, "Oh, effort, I got to go in. I got a bloody customer." And I thought, oh, okay, sorry, I've obviously interrupted your gossip session at the front there. Anyway, then she walks in and she sort of asked very tersely whether she could help me. I said, no, thank you. I'm not going to interfere with your life anymore. I'm just looking. And then her phone rang, and inside the shop, like, it was a chain store, and she was vaping inside. And I thought, I bet you there's not a whole heap of happiness in this chain store upper management if they knew that that was going on. And then when her phone rang, she was obviously talking to a family member, and she goes, sorry, love, I can't effing make it. I've got a bloody customer. And you can't write that stuff unless you've been there and you've seen it and you've heard it. I actually wrote that into the book, and I named the store, but my editors made me take it out in case I upset somebody. But, customer service isn't always like that in Cal, but that was just an absolute classic.
Yeah, boots on the ground approach to your writing.
It also helps that I really love the town, and I love the bush around it, having grown up in South Australia in the Flinders Ranges and on a cattle station out of Alice Springs in the Territory. I love that type of country. So that always helps, I'm really happy to go up there and visit.
Now, we've mentioned a couple of times that this book doesn't feature Detective Dave Burrows, but his offsider, who did work with him at one time, Detective Jack Higgins, along with his partner, Zara Ellison, whom we've seen in some of your other novels as well. And you alluded to the conflict in Jack and Zara's relationship, in that he's a police detective and she's a journalist. And they've moved over to Kalgoorlie because of something that happened in Zara's professional life. And you get the feeling in this book that Jack isn't entirely convinced that the move from South Australia to Kalgoorlie was worth it for him.
Yeah, so when you actually change states as a policeman, as a detective, you cannot go straight back into your position that you held in that other state. You have to go and do some training. It's about a 6-week training course, I think. And then you have to go back into uniform. So Jack, to go to Kalgoorlie, has taken a demotion. He was on the up and up as a detective in Adelaide. So he's not convinced. And especially when he gets into the police station and finds, Jack and Zara in their previous life, everybody knew that Zara was a journalist and that they had their relationship sorted, but they are going into a whole new world where nobody knows them, nobody knows their integrity, nobody knows how they work together or how they don't work together. And so, there is a whole heap of conflict around those relationships between Jack and Zara, but also between Jack and his new colleagues, and then Zara and her new colleagues. So there is a fair bit to sort through with that. And I don't know whether they end up sorting through it completely or not. There is still more to go there.
Yeah, so interesting because I didn't really appreciate that there is this sort of like perception of, a relationship between a detective and a journalist being problematic in any way. Is that actually a real thing?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I spoke to Andy and Ryan, who are the Gold Squad detectives, about this, and just for some fresh eyes, because my detective friend, whose name incidentally is Dave, we know about this relationship because it's been with us for quite some time. So I was just looking for some new eyes. And they just said to me, we wouldn't be talking to Jack. There would be a whole heap of text messages going around the office that didn't include Jack until we knew that we could trust him. And the minute that any leak ever came out of the office, we would be looking straight at him, whether he had integrity, whether he didn't. I don't know if anyone remembers that when Cleo went missing up north, a little girl. Yeah, she went missing up the north of WA there a couple of years ago, I think it was. And I actually made mention of that in the prospect because the detective who found Cleo ended up. And when you're in those types of investigations, it's highly emotional and everyone's living together. The cops are together, the journalists are always there. There's this melting pot of emotions that makes you behave in a way that perhaps you wouldn't always behave in. And the guy that actually found Cleo has been removed from the police force because he got into a relationship with a journalist up there and gave her information while the case was going on. So it is absolutely a real thing.
You mentioned the Gold Squad, and this fascinated me no end because not long after Jack's arrival in Kalgoorlie, and because of this incident with the Grey Nomads, Jack is pushed back up to detective much quicker than he would have ordinarily, and he starts working with the Gold Squad. And I was just fascinated by the idea of there being a detective sort of like branch completely devoted to investigations of crimes involving gold and gold theft. Is that the best way to describe it?
Absolutely. Why does that fascinate you? Because when you hear about gold, wouldn't you assume that it gets stolen? So there absolutely is. The interesting thing about the Gold Squad is it is partially funded by the mining industry. So they have a tech analyst in there who, so when you go to be employed by a gold mine, you've obviously got to do a police clearance. Now, not everyone provides a real police clearance because they can be bought on the black market, all that type of thing. So the Gold Squad actually goes through and checks all of the police clearances to make sure that they are real for every application that comes through. So as you can imagine, that would be a huge job. So there is a particular person that is sort of dedicated to that. But yeah, there's different types of people that steal gold. So you've got your organized crime, which will obviously, be looking for big lots of gold, and the easiest way and the safest way of obtaining that gold. Then you've got people that just sometimes make bad mistakes, and the temptation of it sitting in front of them is too great. So if they're working in a gold pour room and they can sweep up some sweepings from the floor, there'll be tiny particles of gold that you can't see in that. They might sweep that up and empty it into their thermos and take it away. That is still theft. Even though it might only equate to a couple of $1,000s worth of gold, that is still theft. And then you've got your people that are just really low to high crims that, will go onto someone's lease or work out a way that they can steal some gold and they've purposely done it. It's not that they've been too tempted, they've purposely gone there and done it. And the amount of gold processing plants that are on the edge of Kalgoorlie in people's backyards that the cops go in every day to shut down is insane. Andy and Ryan told me a story about one particular place that they go to really regularly, so regularly that the little boy that lives in that house is usually on the couch watching TV. They give him a high five on the way out, on the way past it, while they're about to go and arrest his dad, you know? So
You made mention of that
yeah,
family, like in a roundabout way in the book too.
I did, yeah. Yeah.
I guess, and it sounded naive when I said that the Gold Squad fascinated me because it just would never occur to me to touch something that didn't belong to me.
Well, you wouldn't make a very good criminal then, would you? Or a good crime
exactly.
writer?
I wouldn't.
The Gold Squad cover about 1,000,000 square kilometres of Australia. It's mostly in WA, well, it is all in WA, but it goes north. And that is the biggest police area in the world. And there's two of them. So they are looking for more detectives, but at the moment, well, last time I spoke to them, which was a while ago now, they might have got some more, but there were two of them. So they spend a lot of time on the road going in and out of gold mines. I just always find it fascinating that they're only stopping the petty criminals, I suppose, if they introduce this, but the security on mine sites, people talk about it being insanely high, but from talking to Andy and Ryan, I'm not sure it's as high as what it could be. You know, it's a very dusty industry to be involved in. And yes, they have cameras in the gold pour room, but not everybody wipes the lenses. So you don't always have good vision. Yeah. So I think there could be things that were done, but, whether or not that actually it's worth it for the amount of gold that they might lose that way. Maybe that's why they don't.
Now, the other thing that I wanted to chat to you quickly about was I didn't know that gold had a DNA. So some of the gold in this book gets tracked back to a particular mine because of this DNA. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Everything has DNA, which is bizarre, isn't it? And this particular company that I name in this book, and I can't remember what it's called now, but the guy that owns it, it's the only DNA testing company in Australia, I think it is. So they can test apples, they can work out where the origin of apples are, anything really that has got properties in it. So like for gold, it's got nickel, it's got silver. Like gold is not 100% gold. Different parts of the country have different properties inside the gold, and that's what they test for. So, whether they're looking for how much nickel's in there, how much silver's in there, how much whatever else. Obviously, it's the same as what you see on TV. Detectives always have to put a rush on the DNA results for forensics because they need it now. When in reality, sometimes it might take 6 or 8 months to get these results. So, it's not a quick fix. There's still a whole heap of investigation that has to be done around that to get the answers that they're looking for. And it's probably not 100%, it's accurate, really, really accurate, but it's probably not going to 100% prove that that's where it's come from. But it can certainly push it into an area that they can go that narrows the search down. And when you're looking at, like 1,000,000 square kilometres, narrowing the search is probably a great thing.
Now, one of the other interesting things you touch on in this novel is how the government tracks the illegal proceeds of crime or money laundering through an organisation called AUSTRAC, which I don't think Jack knew about much before he got to Kalgoorlie, did he?
No, well, it's one of those things. He probably did know about it. In reality, he would have known about it, but it wasn't something he'd ever come across. So anything that's $10,000 and above has to be registered with AUSTRAC. And that's just making sure the proceeds aren't helping organised crime overseas, or, there's nothing really bad. It's not a tax thing. It's completely different to making sure that you're paying the taxes that you should be paying. And also there is this loophole that you can earn up to, I can't remember how much it is, but it's over $75,000 and not have to pay tax on the gold that you find because it's a hobby, you see. So yeah, so the AUSTRAC is the government-based organisation or part of the government department that makes sure that this money isn't being used for wrongdoing. So they just keep a bit of a track on where it goes and what bank account it hits.
And as you mentioned, because Kalgoorlie is very much a cash-focused society, it's a big consideration for people who are paying or buying in cash up there.
Yeah, the amount of actual gold that is still held or the cash that goes. So there, Kalgoorlie has a bank up there that has got obviously the old, the security boxes, and they're not really in any other bank across Australia anymore. They shut them all down, but Kalgoorlie has to keep theirs there because often there are gold nuggets in there or there's cash that's put in there. And the bank managers, luckily I know one up there, they don't know what's in those boxes. So if they take somebody in to have a look at those boxes, they actually either have to leave the room or turn around while they're being opened. So, there's lots of ways to still get around that AUSTRAC thing, but you just take out a nugget here and a nugget there. But if someone turns up with a big amount, then it is traced.
We've already talked a little bit about grey nomads, and I spoke about it in my introduction. And as you alluded to, one of the funnier things in this novel was the commentary on grey nomads and how much of a menace they are on the roads. But it turns out not to be very funny very quickly in this book. So what did you learn about them during the research and writing of the book? Because I think there are a lot of people out there, and maybe even some listeners who are listening today, a lot of people dream about exchanging their home for a luxe camper van and driving around Australia, but it's not really that simple, is it?
No, as someone that spends a whole heap of time on the road, I get so frustrated with grey nomads, not just grey nomads, but they're the ones I'm picking on at the moment. And, these ones that think they're doing the right thing by just tonking along at 80 k's an hour when it's easy for you to get past. Well, when you're a truck coming at 100 k's an hour and you've got someone doing 80 in front of you and they can't pass, they can't pull up that quickly. They've got, 120 tons on behind them. And there's this blip in their way. Like they just want to run over these caravanners. And I've said that in every event that I've done. So if you are a caravana, please keep up to 100, especially when you're in WA, you're only allowed to do 100, but keep up to 100 so you don't really frustrate the truckies. And some of them pull off the road and let people pass, and that's okay, but it's also not overly safe. Yeah, so look, they are, I just see so many accidents that happen with caravans. And, I think I've read about 4 accidents in the last 2 weeks on the East Coast. We had a terrible accident here in the Shire just across from where I live leading up to Easter. When people don't know how to pack caravans properly for weight, then that's a disaster too, because strong winds can push them off balance, which then in turn can make them roll, which then in turn gives you a car accident. So it is not just backing up to a caravan, hooking it on and driving out your driveway. There's a whole heap of other things that should be looked at. And if you've only driven a little car all of your life and then suddenly you buy a great big ute, like a big Ram and a big caravan, go and do some courses. Everyone will thank you for it and you'll be a whole heap safer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a big takeaway message from this book, that if you're going to get behind one of these big vehicles, make sure that you've got some good sort of instruction behind you first.
And look, those big vehicles, you can't expect a truckie that is pulling 3 trailers to know if his last trailer, which is, like 60 odd meters behind him with 1, 2, 3 different turning points in that truck, to know if he has clipped your car or if he hasn't. That is totally up to you as a driver to make sure that you are giving him enough room. That is not the truckie's fault.
Now, Fleur, a couple of other really important issues that you touch on in this narrative are mobile phone reception and lack of coverage in rural and remote areas, as well as healthcare. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about these issues and how you understand they impact the quality of life for people in rural and remote areas.
Oh, well, ever since they've turned off 3G, everybody in the bush is fighting for range. The amount of people that have had to go to Starlink and not rely on Telstra. If you come out into the bush, don't expect your Optus mobile phones to work. They don't. There's no Optus out here. It's Telstra. So people that are driving headers and trying to sell grain during harvest can't make phone calls to sell grain. So they're missing out on prices. I've ended up having to put a Starlink roaming modem on the ute of my car, because if I go out bush, I haven't got mobile range. And as a single person in the bush camping, then I want a bit of security. So certainly mobile range, if there is an accident, a business, anything that is important, you cannot access. You will get, even driving from Esperance to Perth, there is, which is a 7 hour drive. Most of it, we just sit on one bar. We're going through a heap of country, 700 kilometres, and we've got one bar. And the government says it's not their problem. I believe that they've got a duty of care, but I'm one person, and I can promise you that the big telecos don't give they really don't. So we are certainly at a disadvantage. And people say, oh, well, you're the minority. Yes, we are. But do we still not deserve good facilities? And that's exactly the same with healthcare.
It's so interesting. I certainly, in relation to one of those telco providers, you don't even have to go very far outside of greater metropolitan Sydney to be at a disadvantage. And you get lots of black spot areas, and you can't pick up reception, you can't make a phone call, you can't access your maps, anything like that, which I think can be quite treacherous. And I think these days, where young people in particular are relying on mobile phone coverage for safety, it can be a real problem.
I was really gobsmacked when one of my friends, my young godson was driving to Kalgoorlie. His girlfriend's family were living in Kalgoorlie. So they went up there for Christmas. Well, my friend actually had to sit and write out the directions because, one, they haven't got a map. He had an Optus phone, so there is no Google Maps if that's what you're going to be using. So sit down and write out all the directions. It's not difficult to get to Cal. Could have followed the signs, but that is my point. Like there is a safety issue there, and I find that a lot of people don't know that Optus doesn't work outside of the cities. They get here and they go, oh, we can't make a phone call even in the town centre. Well, that's because they're not out here.
Yeah. So what do you think the answer is?
I'm very interested in politics, incredibly interested in politics. And I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall, getting the government that we have in at the moment to understand what is going on in the bush. Our roads are horrific. People talk about, well, why do we need roads out there? Well, that's where the trucks come from that bring you your meat to the supermarkets. And funnily enough, we actually like to eat too. So those trucks have to bring our food back as well. I read something somewhere the other day that there was a city couple that were going down south and they couldn't nap in between the tourist destinations that they were visiting because the roads were too rough. It's like, well, come out and have a look. This is what we're living with all the time. Yes, I get a little bit het up about these things and could talk forever on it. So you probably should shut me up.
No, I'm fascinated by this. Obviously, a person living in the bush has a different experience of life, not just in terms of their immediate physical surroundings, but in terms of these issues, things that we think of that we should have as a basic right or a basic minimum level of service with relation to things. We have a different experience here in the city than you do.
Well, domestic violence, and I come from, if anyone who knows my background knows that I come from a domestic violence relationship, and I spent a lot of time setting up an organisation called DV Assist specifically for regional, rural and remote areas because it is so different. But we've had trouble. It's been announced that the perpetrators that are wearing ankle bracelets can't be tracked. One, because there is shit mobile range. So those ankle bracelets that are put on offenders that have RVOs against them, that they don't work because there isn't any mobile range to make them work, and they don't have the facilities or the people to track them. And that's only in rural areas. So tell me why we have to be disadvantaged with that when they have got people in Perth that will follow all of those ankle bracelets all the time, but they can't do it in the bush. That is insanely dangerous, especially when, we've got access to guns out here, isolation, all that sort of thing. So, it is really, really concerning.
You mentioned your detective friend, Dave, who helps you and has helped you. And I did wonder if that relationship was still going and whether or not you still call on him while you're writing.
Yeah, Dave and I are still always good mates. Like we've been mates for like 16 or 17 years or something. So I think his ego took a little bit of a blow when I told him we were going to retire Dave. But no, we're good. We catch up just as much as what we did before. He still reads everything, but he's retired. And so he's a whole heap busier. So he finds it a little bit more challenging to find some time to read a lot of my work. But, he still does. He's still on the end of the phone. I had a really long conversation with him a couple of days ago just about this book too in the Kalgoorlie series because just something wasn't working for me. Yeah, we got it sorted. So yeah, no, he's still around, but he is retired and really enjoying life. He's riding his motorbike everywhere and yeah, just having a whole heap of fun as he should, after 40 plus years in the police force.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, Fleur, there must be something in the water over there in WA because you are a large star in a constellation of some of Australia's finest crime writers that include Dervla McTiernan, Sarah Foster, and Michael Trant, as you mentioned before. What do you think it is about WA that inspires such writing?
Oh, look, I think all of Australia inspires those writing. We're only four in a bunch of a whole heap of other crime writers across Australia. And I think we've all got fascination with crime. Devla doesn't set her books in WA, but again, isolation breeds lots of places to dump bodies, doesn't it? So, I think that could be part of it. But, also the Australian society has a fascination with crimes, real life crime, whether it's podcasts or whatever it is. And I guess we are just giving society what they want.
It's wonderful. So you did mention that this novel, The Prospect, is the first in a series of books that you're setting in Kalgoorlie. Is there anything you could tell us about the next one?
Yeah, so far it's a series of four, like it was a 4-book contract. So book 2 is, I think we have settled on a name, The Unforgotten, and we have a new detective coming in. Her name is Angie, and a new radio announcer, and her name is Lily. And so they're investigating, or Angie is investigating the disappearance of a young boy called Max, who just they can't work out whether he's disappeared or run away. But as they're investigating that, they discover that there are a few other kids that have gone missing over a period of time. So they're just working out what that's all about.
Okay, Fleur, if there was one thing you would like readers to take away from this novel, what would it be? Might be a bit hard to
Do
narrow
you
it
know
down to
what?
one.
Well, do you know what? When people ask me that, I always feel like it's a bit of a literary discussion, and this book certainly is not literary. You know what I want? I just want someone to enjoy, just give them a few hours of escapism, some entertainment, some enjoyment, and perhaps they might decide that they want to visit Kalgoorlie at the end of it as well. And if they're going to do that, they should come this year because the wildflower season is going to be insane because there has been so much rain up there. It's going to be
Oh,
beautiful.
wow. When is the wildflower season? Is it in the spring?
Yeah, August, September, October. October's getting a bit warmer. They sort of finish in October, but yeah, there's certainly the springtime. And because it's north, it's in the middle, it gets warmer up there earlier than what it does on the coast. So you sometimes can get them coming out July, but yeah, sort of mid-August onwards.
Fantastic. I, for one, can't wait to visit Kalgoorlie. Yours is the second book I've read about Kalgoorlie, not necessarily a crime book. And I just think it inspires so much curiosity.
Yeah, it's a fascinating place.
Yeah. And now, Fleur, you might know that there are a lot of writers who listen to this podcast. And given your breadth of experience in this industry, I wondered if you had any tips to offer.
I'm not very good at that. Reading is really everything you say is cliche because everyone says it. So it's reading and writing and keeping on doing that stuff. The only other thing I would say is finding some time to write if you're not a full-time writer. Sometimes it's a good idea just to change it up a little bit, so work out, whether you like getting up in the morning at 4 o'clock or whether you like the 10 o'clock at night after you put the kids to bed or what. Like for me, I find I'm more creative in the morning. Writing at night is not going to happen because I'm usually in bed at 7:30 because I get up at 4 o'clock most mornings. So, and I reckon the other thing that really helps is just taking some time out for you and, sitting on your back veranda. And I've got a bit of a saying that I'm not procrastinating, I'm percolating when I'm sitting on the back veranda, just swinging in my chair, looking at the trees or lying on the grass. I might look like I'm not doing anything, but my brain is usually very busy.
That's such great advice, Fleur. I think it's right. We need to fill our well in order to be creative. And sometimes that is, about giving us time to imagine.
And I think we need to empty our minds at the same time to allow that creativity to come. And Elizabeth Gilbert, I saw her speak in Adelaide in February, and she said, be curious. She told this story about how she walked outside of her hotel room, and across the road, she could have gone either left or right, but across the road, she saw these coloured pots, and she thought, oh, no, they're jumping out at her. So she crossed the road, she looked at these pots, and she thought how beautiful they were. And she said, that was it, end of story. It was curiosity. That was the end of the story. There was nothing more to put on that, but it was curiosity. And curiosity fuels your creativity. So, or fuels it, not fills it, fuels it. So, and I loved that. I thought that was brilliant because we're always looking for something. We're expecting that we're going to find something out of everything we look at. Or we don't have to. We can just be curious and enjoy and be open. And then when we're ready, or when our idea is ready, that's when it will hit us, I think.
Fleur, I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you today about this page-turning novel. I wish you luck with all the promotion and all the talks and the future books to come. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.